Welcome to Hockeywiztalks podcast. Today I'll be talking about players to avoid in fantasy hockey and players to pick up in fantasy football. Check out my fantasy sports blog at hockeywiztalksfantasy.blogspot.com. Players to avoid in fantasy hockey. Anze Kopitar. Anze Kopitar had a subpar year by his standard last season, putting up only 22 goals and 60 points along with 19 power play points, but he was also a minus 20. Kopitar is ranked 122nd overall this season, ahead of players like Evander Kane, Kyle Palmieri, William Karlsson, Dylan Strome, Max Domi, TJ Oshie, and Anthony Mantha. The Kings aren't expected to be very good this season, so I would avoid any LA Kings players, including Kopitar. Jaden Schwartz. Jaden Schwartz is a player who plays better in the playoffs than in the regular season. Schwartz had an up and down year last season as he put up just 11 goals and 36 points along with 5 power play points in the regular season. Jaden Schwartz is ranked 166th overall, ahead of players like Ryan Getzlaf, Nino Niederreiter, Zach Parise, Nikolai Ehlers, and Alex Galchenyuk. Jaden Schwartz is a player who will get around 50 points a season, but you can get a player like that much later in the draft. Sam Reinhart. Sam Reinhart would have solid fantasy value if he were playing with Jack Eichel. However, there is a chance he plays on a different line. If Reinhart does indeed play on a different line, then his fantasy value will greatly diminish. Reinhart is ranked 189th overall right now, ahead of players such as Andreas Athanasiou, Jake DeBrusk, Yanni Gourde, and Kevin Labanc. Avoid drafting Sam Reinhart if he isn't playing on the Sabres top line, because he will have a bad plus-minus, and he won't be putting up eye-popping stats. Erik Gustafsson. Erik Gustafsson had a phenomenal year last season, putting up 17 goals and 60 points along with 18 power play points, hence why he was ranked so high in fantasy this year. Gustafsson is ranked 84th overall in fantasy hockey this season, ahead of players such as Rasmus Dahlin, Keith Yandel, Alex Pietrangelo, Thomas Chabot, and OEL. While Gustafsson may still have a great year, it's too much a risk to pick him over Dahlin, Chabot, Pietrangelo, or OEL. Dougie Hamilton. Dougie Hamilton should not be drafted as high as he is ranked because there are players ranked after him that are better. Hamilton is ranked 107th overall in fantasy hockey, ahead of defensemen like Jacob Trouba, Zach Werenski, Cale Makar, and Quentin Hughes. Even though Hamilton should still put up the same numbers as he did last year, Hamilton can be quite streaky, which is not good for head-to-head leagues. John Gibson. John Gibson has already established himself as one of the premier goalies in the NHL. However, it might be a risk to draft him in fantasy hockey. The reason why is because the Anaheim Ducks are in a bit of a transition phase and are not likely to be a playoff team this year. Gibson is ranked 51st overall in fantasy hockey, ahead of goalies like Braden Holtby, Jordan Binnington, Matt Murray, and Martin Jones. While Gibson may have a good individual season, he isn't going to get enough wins to justify drafting him that high. Fantasy Football Waiver Wire, players to pick up for Week 3. Check out my Facebook page, Mr. Hockeywiz777, and my Instagram, Mr. Hockeywiz77. Jimmy Garoppolo. Jimmy Garoppolo had one of his best games as a 49er in Week 2, throwing for 297 yards and 3 touchdowns. With some quarterbacks struggling early and the injury to Ben Roethlisberger, owners might want to consider picking up Garoppolo. Jimmy G and the 49ers will take on the Pittsburgh Steelers in Week 3, which is a great matchup for him. Frank Gore. The ageless wonder Frank Gore is still proving that he's still a good running back in the NFL. Gore put up 16.30 fantasy points in Week 2 and could have a similar performance in Week 3. Frank Gore and the Bills will take on the Cincinnati Bengals, who were destroyed by the 49ers in Week 2. Raheem Mostert. Raheem Mostert had his breakout game in Week 2, putting up 24.10 fantasy points. Mostert is expected to tandem with Matt Breida in the backfield for the 49ers, and thus far, both of them have been solid. Mostert and the 49ers will face the struggling Pittsburgh Steelers team in Week 3, which will be a great matchup for him. Demarcus Robinson. Demarcus Robinson had a breakout game in Week 2, going off for 172 yards receiving and 2 touchdowns. With Tyreek Hill out, Robinson will play a much larger role in the Chiefs' offense and should put up great numbers. Any receiver of Patrick Mahomes can be a fantasy stud on any given week. So if Robinson is still available, snag him now. DJ Chark. DJ Chark has put up some amazing stats through the first 2 weeks of the season. He has 201 yards receiving and 2 touchdowns. Chark has been the Jaguars' best receiver this season, leading them in catches, receiving yards, and touchdowns. Chark and the Jaguars will face the Tennessee Titans in Week 3, which will be a huge test for him. Nelson Aguilar. Nelson Aguilar will get a lot more targets now with Alshon Jeffrey and Deshaun Jackson injured. If either of these two players are out in week 3, Aguilar will be the guy that will get more looks. Aguilar and the Eagles will be up against the Detroit Lions in week 3, which is a solid matchup for him. Jason Witten. Jason Witten is still an effective tight end in deep fantasy pools because he is a threat in the red zone. Witten has a touchdown in every game this season, and while you don't expect him to get one every game, he certainly will get his chances. Witten and the Cowboys will take on the dreadful Miami Dolphins in week 3, which is a great matchup for him. San Francisco 49ers defense. The San Francisco 49ers defense is the second highest scoring defense in fantasy football this season, with 34 fantasy points. In week 3, the 49ers will take on the struggling Pittsburgh Steelers, who are playing without Big Ben. The 49ers defense is worth picking up because they have a pretty weak schedule this year, and they have been pretty good thus far this season. Zane Gonzalez. Zane Gonzalez has put up 22 fantasy points through 2 weeks this season. Gonzalez and the Cardinals will take on the Carolina Panthers in week 3, which should be a good matchup for Gonzalez. If you need a kicker, you should consider picking him up because Gonzalez has been one of the more productive kickers this year. In my next podcast, I talk about impact rookies in fantasy hockey and players to pick up in fantasy football.